on. ThinkTech. Here we are on a given Friday at 12 noon. Welcome back. I'm Jay Fidell. Today we're doing global connections, and in fact, the proper name of our show is Midnight in Europe, because every few weeks we check in with our European correspondent, Gauri Khandekar, who is with FRIDE, FRIDE, which is a think tank operating out of Spain, and she's in the Brussels office. And so we talked to her about things that are crossing her desk and that are important in the European consciousness, if you will. Hi, Gauri. Thank you for joining us at Midnight in Europe.
Hi, Jay. My pleasure to be here.
Wonderful to see you on Skype. The magic of Skype, just amazing. It's like you're right here, right now. So in Europe, I have a list of things that are happening in our perception. They are certainly global things, and I wanted to get your take on them, and I wanted to get your feeling about what the European community and the average person on the street feels about these issues. First on my list is Ebola. Ebola is certainly scaring the world. There are cases popping up here and there. There are great concerns about a scourge that is out of control. At the same time, there are reports of medical advances and possible ways to deal with it medically. There are, for that matter, reports of quarantine arrangements that have actually worked in certain areas in Africa. So the news is mixed. How is the news about Ebola filtering around in Europe?
Yeah, it's also pretty mixed here. I mean, you nailed it. There are mixed news that are coming out. People don't really know what to think about it. I mean, from Europe it seems quite far, but there are also no checks being done at the airports. No screening passengers, and then there are many passengers that fly from Europe to these affected countries in Guinea, Liberia, Sierra Leone. So it's still thought to be quite far. But the recent cases in the U.S. in particular, I think there was a gentleman in Chicago, if I'm not mistaken, and now recently a doctor in New York who reported having this virus. So since then, I think there's been a bit of an urgency in response. Europe was criticized quite a bit for not having responded quite actively, and now the EU has appointed a point man on Ebola, who is also the EU's commissioner or the in charge for humanitarian affairs and crisis management. His name is Christos Stylianides. He's Cypriot and a dentist by profession, by the way. But he was also a member of Parliament, of the European Parliament. So he's the guy that will look after the main response to Ebola in the EU. And this follows the US, who named Ron Klain as its Ebola czar. Financial aid is about to be doubled, and this is because Britain really criticized. They've already sent about 750 troops to Sierra Leone to set up treatment units and training facility. And the summit, there was an EU summit now, and they urged everyone all the countries, the 28 EU member states, to contribute and send around 2,000 healthcare workers. But the financial response up to now has been quite poor. I mean, there are some countries, smaller countries, are sending have given only about 5 million euros each, which is less than Swedish firm IKEA.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, just on that note, I mean, celebrities are giving money. President Obama said he was sending some 3,000 troops in there to to help. One tech executive, and I'm sorry I can't remember the name right now, is in the paper as having committed $100 million to put this, to put this under control. So there are people stepping up, including both government and industry in the U.S. And I wonder, is it your sense that the people in Europe, who actually should be concerned because they're actually closer to this, and there's probably greater vectors north and south between Africa and Europe than with the U.S. They should be concerned, but it doesn't sound like. You know what it sounds like? It sounds like they are waiting for the U.S. to do something rather than taking affirmative action in Europe. Am I right?
True, true. I agree with you, and it's somehow almost always the case that the EU follows the US. But now, in terms of this crisis, it's about time that the EU takes lead in response, because the EU is closer. There are a lot of links, active links to Africa. It's just across the Mediterranean. And screening is not being done. So I think that's an issue. And local people on the street now seem to be worried, I mean, it's quite quite possible that somebody could bring back the virus here. So it's just a matter of time, I think.
Yeah. No, you haven't had any active cases in Europe?
No, not that we know of, actually. I mean, some people would just think it's a cold because the symptoms are similar, and then they would come out later on, I guess. But as of now, no, not yet.
Okay. Well, we're going to follow up with you next time we speak. We'll ask you the same question: How is Ebola doing in Europe? Are there active cases, and what steps are being taken? Let me move on to one I hadn't thought of until just now, and that's something we did talk about before, and that's the Ukraine. The Ukraine is kind of somehow settled in, although there's still violence there. And Putin's plan about, using sort of a Trojan horse approach in the name of peace and humanitarian efforts to put troops inside and undo the resolve of Ukraine against his advances. How are things doing, at least in the mind of the European? And let me add that my guess would be that it's getting colder now. Here we are almost at November, and when it gets cold, you need gas all the more, gas that comes from Gazprom, gas that Putin needs to can control. So what's the news in Europe on the Ukraine?
Well, it is getting colder, and I think this winter is going to be quite cold. Last year we got lucky, actually. The temperature in Brussels didn't drop below 9 degrees at least, so. But this year it's going to be again a Russian winter, let's say, here. Sorry. I think it's still sanctions war, and still the whole the question is how Europe is going to deal with Ukraine, because it is up to Europe to deal with Ukraine. And George Soros has just urged the European Union to kind of push for a solution to the crisis. I don't see anything happening in the next month or so, which is unlikely. But there are so many Eastern European member states that are quite concerned, and for good reason. Ukraine has, of course, said that it will siphon off gas meant for Western Europe, because it will need the fuel to beat the cold. Europe is in a tough spot already. The sanctions war with Russia meant that Russia had imposed agricultural sanctions against agricultural imports from European countries, and this has really affected some economies, especially Poland, who exports most of its apples there, and Eastern Europe in particular. So no, no interim solution in sight. And this is the first time, I think, after the Cold War that there would really be some sort of major crisis, gas crisis, to affect Western Europe.
Well, you know, it's funny that so much of this is based on what the media chooses to report, and the media is always trying to report things that it thinks people are interested in hearing. It wants to sell newspapers and the like, and so if there's nothing hot happening with Ebola, they're not going to report much, and likewise, if there's nothing happening in the Ukraine, or if things seem to have moved on from the battles and troubles and plane crashes and the like in Ukraine, they're going to move on. So I guess I'm spurred to ask you, where has the press moved on to? What are the headlines like these days in the European newspapers? What are you reading lately?
Well, nowadays it's all about the new European Commission that's being set up. The new leaders of Europe, Donald Tusk was the Polish Prime Minister, has now become the President of the European Council. Jean-Claude Juncker has become the new EU Commission President. And we have Italy's former Foreign Minister, who's become the new EU Foreign Policy Chief, is Mogherini, and Federica Mogherini. And so this is the whole issue. But I think now, in particular, today actually, there was an EU summit right across the street from my house. And here we had a major event, let's say, where the EU gave Britain a bill for 2 billion euros to pay, because there is an evaluation recently of GDP since the 90s, and Britain turned out to have done well, so its contribution should have been higher, and they've been asked to pay this bill by December. Now, Britain already has a special position in the EU, and there are rumors that Britain might even leave the EU. They would consider leaving the European Union next year. So this is a bit of an interesting spot that we've been put on in, and this is very much concerning for the UK government, because the economic situation in Europe is still very poor. It's not yet under control. Europe is still not growing as it should. And I think this is going to be a bit interesting, and maybe it would really be the nail in the coffin of the UK's membership of the EU.
Yeah, very interesting. We're going to take a short break, Gauri. That's Gauri Khandekar. She's in the think tank called FRIDE, F-R-I-D-E, which is headquartered in Spain, but she's in the Brussels office. She joins us here at midnight in Europe, in Brussels, to talk about what's happening there and what the perception is. When we come back, Gauri, I'd like to ask you about the vote in Scotland. That must have had a kind of effect on the continent. It must stand as an example of something, and I'd like to ask you about that right after the break. We'll be right back.
Ted Ralston, folks, host of our show at ThinkTech Hawaii called Where the Road Leads, where we talk about technology influencing the future of Hawaii. Technology, of course, is the art of solving problems. We always bring in interesting and informed guests who can see from different perspectives and different points of view how that future might unfold and how technology can assist us in getting there. So once again, join us 4 o'clock to 5 o'clock on Fridays. Ted Ralston, your host. And please, if you have ideas that you'd like us to address on this show, or folks who you think should be on it, let us know.
Okay, we're back. We're live. We're here on ThinkTech. It's Friday, the 12 to 1 hour, and we do this special broadcast because at 12 o'clock noon here on Friday, it's 12 midnight in Europe, and so we connect with Gauri Khandekar from time to time. She's a think tank person with a think tank called FRIDE, which is in Spain and Brussels, and she tells us what's going on in Europe and how Europe is reacting to global events. And so, I mean, it was really quite extraordinary what happened in Scotland. I'm happy with the result. I think a lot of people must be happy with the, the basic stability of the result. But were people rooting for a secession? Was this kind of related in some ways to the drifting in the EU, where Scotland wanted to drift away from the UK? What did people think about it?
It was a tough vote. I mean, you could literally see Cameron sweating, David Cameron, the UK Prime Minister, sweating, stressing on TV, and so many rallies shown across the country. And the yes vote seemed quite strong, but the no vote, no to breaking up the union, eventually won. But the Scottish referendum gave a lot of hope to the different separatist movements across Europe, and one in particular is the Catalonian movement across Spain. Spain's government opposes the Catalan consultation vote, but Catalan, the province of Catalan, which is quite rich and provides a lot to the Spanish economy.
What part of Spain is that?
Closely.
What part of Spain is that?
Of Spain. It's the northern part of Spain.
Okay, northwest.
Sorry. Yes.
Okay.
So they've been watching it closely, and what it would have meant if Scotland would have broken away is that they would have not eventually joined the European Union. They would have had to ask for membership again, and this would have been problematic because then Spain, as a member of the EU, would have vetoed the Scottish membership bid, and so would have probably Greece and Cyprus, because of the Cypriot dispute. So this was quite interesting, and it was good to see that the Scots did vote to stay in the UK, which just makes things simpler. I mean, they could have gone the other way too.
Yeah.
And I should have been fine, but.
I wonder though, were the Scots? I mean, we heard so many people on the radio and television talking about that issue in Scotland. It was really well covered, but I wasn't sure I heard anybody talking about the effects of their independence on their possibilities to join the EU. Was this a big issue, you think, in Scotland? Were they worried, for example, people who voted no, were they worried that they would be rejected from the EU, as you said?
Yes, yes, this was one of the big issues. The other issue was that almost every big firm across Scotland said that they would leave the territory and move to London. You see, the UK is also part of the European Common Market, which means that there is free movement of people, and so there are no borders within the European Union. Even though the UK has its own border controls, but European citizens can live and work across the European Union. So with Scotland becoming a new country, the borders would have gone up again. And I mean, there's so many mixed families. It's hard to know whether they're Scottish or, English. So what would happen to them? I have friends who are, half Scottish, half English. And it was just odd for them to think that one of their parents would be a foreigner,
Yeah. Really interesting. Well, what struck me is, if you recall, the U.S. had an issue about secession back in 1861, and we resolved that with a 4-year and very bloody war, the Civil War. And the issue hasn't really come up since then. I wonder, how this all got started, where Scotland could actually take a vote on whether to secede, and let's assume, that all things equal, going forward, there are still a lot of people in Scotland that would like to see a secession. So query, could this happen again? And would it be resolved in the same way?
Not for the next 100 years. So that's the term of the referendum, not for another 100 years. You see, like, Scotland has been inching a bit of power over the past few years and during the past few governments. So it was Tony Blair, I recollect, who had granted more powers to Scotland, the Scottish Parliament. But then now it had come up to the point of a referendum, and this result would be valid for another 100 years. So I don't think in between there would be any mini referendum. Although there is a referendum on EU membership next year of the entire of the UK.
What do you think? What do you think the possibilities are with that?
Yeah, it's hard to tell. You know, there's a party called UKIP in the UK, which is really a Euro exit party. They want Britain to leave the EU, and they're very much negative about the European Union. Now, Britain has always been quite skeptical of the European Union, you know.
Yeah.
So it's hard to say how it would go, because the British media in particular is not really EU friendly. And the current government has offered this referendum as after the elections, you know. So it's a major issue, and they've tried to appease the people by offering this referendum on EU membership itself. So I think it could go anyway, although Britain would have severe costs of quitting the European Union.
Yeah, interesting that we have these huge, big referenda, to use the plural, happening. I guess it shows a certain level of new democracy in the 21st century. These are huge decisions put to the people, and quite remarkable. And I wonder, of course, the UK has been reluctant to go to the EU, and now the EU is having continuing economic problems, as you mentioned. That does not bode well for the referendum falling in favor of joining the EU. But how serious are the problems these days? Read the American papers, and you get the idea that Europe is basically flattered down, that our economy is way better, and we should be happy about that. And the EU is on a cliff somehow, and we're just waiting for somebody to fall off again. What is the news, and how do you feel about it?
Yeah, it is quite severe in terms of stagnation. The whole Eurozone is stagnated. I think Britain was the only country to have grown by very small margin, but Eurozone has stagnated. France is the worst hit, I guess. There has been a little bit of revision. Let me tell you, Eurozone is a group of countries, the economy which uses the euro. Germany and France, for instance, are part of this Eurozone, so is Spain and a number of other countries. So the Eurozone, which controls the the euro, the euro currency, did grow, but it grew from 0.2% to 0.3%, so that's nothing. France and Germany are the main economies in Europe, but France's economy has fallen down quite a bit, from 1.8% growth in April of 2012 to 1% growth in April 2014. So this is something to worry about, because France and Germany have been the traditional motors. Now Germany, which has been leading European recovery, Eurozone recovery, has also downgraded its own growth. So whereas the International Monetary Fund had put Germany's growth at, just let me get the figure here, if I quickly can. Um, yeah, from 1.7% to 1.3%. The Germans themselves have gone to a worse figure of 1.2% this year and for the next year. So um, it is not a good picture across Europe. We're just not picking up growth here, and it's true the U.S. is doing much better.
Well, let's take a short break, Gauri. When we come back, I'd like to ask you what that means socially, what that means in terms of quality of life and quality of benefits to live in those countries, and how the projections, how you would project all that would go with a continuing slow growth. That's Gauri Khandekar. She is a think tank member with FRIDE, a think tank in Europe. She joins us every now and then to report on what's going on in Europe and how people in Europe feel about other world events. We call it midnight in Europe, and indeed it's midnight in Brussels right now here at noon on Friday in Honolulu. We'll be right back after this short break.
Aloha, this is Martin Despang, co-host of the Urban Transcendence Show by Alejandra Yamashita and Martin Despang. And me being an architect and an educator in architecture, I'm really interested in that we make our urban environment here in downtown Honolulu as exciting, invigorating, and challengingly beautiful as our wonderful paradise natural environment. We're going to bring in guests from a diversity of areas that help us to learn how we can achieve that goal that shouldn't be that hard to reach. So we look very much forward to see you then. Thank you.
Here we are. We're back. We're live here on ThinkTech on Friday in the noon to 1 o'clock, 1 p.m. hour, talking with Gauri Khandekar of FRIDE, a think tank in Europe. We call it midnight in Europe because indeed, as it is 12:30 here in Honolulu, it is 12:30 right after midnight in Brussels, where she lives and works. Gauri, the economics is so important, and we can't take anything for granted because failing economics lead to other problems. Do you see other problems arising with this sort of European EU, Eurozone flat economy? What is the result of it? Do you see any indication of problems going ahead?
Yes, I mean the person. Because I live in Brussels. It's the EU bubble, It's the capital of Europe, and there is not that extreme reaction to the crisis, at least on the streets or amongst the local people. But across the European Union and especially the Eurozone, which I explained is the economic zone which uses the euro currency within the European Union. And there, people are not happy. Most of them blame the European Union for troubles in their homes. It's becoming increasingly difficult for countries to sustain the various social models. And with rising unemployment across Europe, it is still quite severe. It's going to be hard to pay all these people that are starting to depend on the social security system and benefits in particular. There's also been a lot of migration, especially towards Britain, and I know it's a major issue in the UK that a lot of people from Eastern European countries have been moving to the UK, and they do have a right to go live and work there because of European Union laws. But they also are increasingly taking state benefits, welfare benefits, and the UK is not really happy. The people of the UK are not happy at all about the situation.
It's interesting because Europe and most of Europe has been a magnet for immigration from all parts of the world. But if there are no jobs and it's under economic pressure, that creates a problem for those who have immigrated or would immigrate. attention, if you will. And I'm wondering if any of the countries involved right now are getting on the front page for being unstable because of their economic issues, or the social issues that follow the economic issues.
Well, you know, over the past 4 years now, all of the countries have been so unstable. It's become normal, you know, it's the new normal, let's say. So you know that France is not doing well. Italy, of course, Portugal, Ireland is doing a tiny bit better than it was, but we're still all in a very fragile situation. We're now here in Europe in stagnation. Now, what the US has been doing is really, it has been aggressively tackling the situation. It's been looking at trade across the world. Um, for Europe, it's different. Most of Europe trades within itself.
Mm.
There's not been so much of an effort, for instance, to tap into Asia. Uh, I've really written so much about EU-Asia trade, and the European Union is really not tapping into Asian growth like the US is, for instance. So, you know, while there is a TPP that the US is undertaking, which is a Trans-Pacific Partnership, Europe's own free trade agreement deals with Asia have been so slow, and trade actually has dropped across Asia for the EU. So EU's trade with every Asian member country, Asian country has dropped in the last year significantly, even with South Korea, with which it has an FTA. So I think it has to do a bit with geoeconomics, about Europe's mercantilist approach to foreign trade, especially with Asia, and within Europe to stimulating recovery by really encouraging exports and exports out of Europe.
Yes, and I was going to ask you what your suggestion, you know, is to cure these ailments, and to make the economy of not one country but all of Europe more robust. So number one on the list would be to incentivize foreign trade, especially to Asia. What else?
Well, of course, to reduce their debts, you know, and this is really the whole issue. The budget deficits and the debts of these countries are quite high. So, I mean, not as the US, of course, which has debt in trillions of dollars, but yeah, it would be one to trade, and Asia is where the growth is. You know, these countries are growing significantly. Even 5% for China, for instance. India, and 7% for China is huge. So look at growth there. Look at exports. Re-incentivize the manufacturing industries in Europe. And yeah, these are the only solutions I can think of for the moment. Besides, of course, the issues of the European Union, which is creating a political economy, a fiscal union as well. So because the taxes and the laws are decided by each country separately, but they still use one currency. This is an issue, I think, which is being tackled slowly. But until Europe becomes the Eurozone, at least becomes a real fiscal union, I think they would continue to have some problems with the economy.
So you'd like to see a greater connection between the members of the EU, laws that are uniform, all kinds of trade arrangements that are uniform, and maybe a strong, unifying, a pan-European government, eh?
Yeah, that's been, you know, all the European economists have said the same thing for the last 10 years at least, or more, you know. So this is really what is needed. And the euro currency, for instance, when they created this eurozone, it had countries which were really rich, uh, like like Germany, for instance, or the Nordic countries, and they had countries which were really poor. So Greece joined in, and it wasn't really a proper economic zone. And of course, all these countries have social welfare states to different degrees. Um, and inflation, which has been the mainstay of the European Central Bank, which does manage inflation, it has not really targeted growth policies. So I think all this complication has has resulted into as not such an attractive recovery. Although I must say that they have been making a number of efforts institutionally.
Let me move on, since we only have 5 minutes left, to one of my favorite topics, and that is the effect of the expansion of ISIS on Europe. Recognizing that some of the activists, the militants in ISIS came from Europe and are coming from Europe even as we speak. There was an issue yesterday about some people in England that wanted to get passports, and they couldn't get passports because the English government believed to leave. The English government believed they were going to go for the wrong reasons. So there's a certain amount of clamping down on that. There was also an article about how ISIS has achieved huge amounts of money from the oil that it controls at the rate of $1 million a day for that oil. I guess it took over the oil. And that it's getting foreign investment too. The strangest thing. I mean, now Europe, when we last spoke, we spoke about this, and Europe was concerned. Is that level of concern increasing, decreasing, the same? How do people feel about it? In the U.S., they're pretty threatened.
Definitely, ISIS is one of the top security threats facing Europe at the moment. People would be less bothered about Ebola, but they are very much more concerned about ISIS. You know, there have been around 3,000 Europeans that have joined Islamist fighters in Syria and the Iraq as of this month. So this is a bit of a worrying figure. It's quite high. Some of these are not even Muslims. They've been converted to Islam. They have converted. They have radicalized, and they've traveled to fight with the jihadists. So they are committing crimes, deadly crimes in the Middle East. And then some of them have wanted to return back to their European countries. This is problematic, and it's a major security concern, especially after what we've seen recently in Canada.
Yes.
The Canadian attack on the attack on the Canadian Parliament has really been a shocker, and it could happen here in Europe, especially with trained fighters coming back. I mean, this is no different from all the fighters that have been going to Pakistan training camps, for instance, during the war against terror. But it is quite severe. It's because ISIS is more organized, is the richest terrorist group in the world, and they have quite sophisticated weapons and a whole system of making money. They make millions every day through oil, for instance, sale of oil and other resources, and exploitation. So I think European response has now, everybody is on high alert, but there should be more done in Iraq and Syria. And the UK, for instance, has been wanting to send fighter jets along with the US.
Yeah. You know, in the U.S., the issue was, and I suppose it still is, whether the U.S. Should commit ground troops. Right now, it hasn't yet officially done that. But I wonder what the conversation is in Europe. I mean, if the U.S. were to commit ground troops, would European countries feel strongly enough about this to join and send their own ground troops, do you think?
No, I feel quite. I mean, the UK, yes, I think the UK is a time-tested friend of the US in Europe. But other countries, no, they're so war-weary. They've all been, politicians here have been battered by public opinion about their troops in Afghanistan, and they don't have any more appetite, I think, to send troops into the Middle East again, and especially because France and Spain, for instance, the first time round, they had voted against sending troops to Iraq. So I don't think that they really would be willing. Although there is something that they could do more is to really use the links with Turkey and to really make Turkey, for instance, be more active in the fight with the Islamists. So I think that's where Europe could play a role.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think they would be willing to send troops on the ground.
Yeah. You know, unfortunately, we're almost out of time, Gauri. I'm sorry, because I had more questions I wanted to ask you, more things that come to mind about, where we'd like to know how Europe reacts and how you react. But one last question before we go, and that is, what are you working on these days? What's your latest paper? What's your latest article that you've published? I'd just like to know what you're doing.
Well, just at this very moment, I'm writing a policy brief on Modi's foreign policy. It's an evaluation of first 4 months of him being in office. So maybe that's what we can talk about the next time I see you.
Absolutely. Okay, that's a deal. That's a date. Gauri Khandekar. Next time we talk, which will be soon, we'll talk about Modi's first few months in office. She's with FRIDE, which is a think tank in Spain and Brussels. And we talk with her every now and then, and we call it Midnight in Europe, Midnight in Brussels, and we really enjoy the discussion. Thank you again for staying up late, Gauri.
My pleasure. Always. Yeah.
Okay, we'll be back. Count on it. Thank you so much, Gauri. Aloha.
Bye.